the end of last class, I suggested that from here on out I'm going to be assuming that there is no soul. I'm going to be discussing the issues that we turn to hereafter from the perspective of the physicalist, the person who says that a person is basically just a fancy body, a body that can do certain special tricks, a body that can function in certain ways that we associate with being a person, a body that can P-function, as we put it. Now, I've given you my reasons for believing there are no souls, basically that the various arguments that might be offered for believing in souls don't seem very compelling upon examination, so there's no good reason to posit this extra entity. For the most part, then, I'm going to be putting aside soul talk. Periodically, I'll come back and talk about how some issue that we are considering might look from the perspective of somebody who does believe in souls. But as I say, for the most part, I'm going to be assuming there are no souls. For those of you who still do believe in the existence of souls, I suppose you could take a great deal of the discussion that follows as some form of large conditional or subjunctive. If there were no souls, then here's what we'd have to say. So although I'll be largely talking from the perspective of the physicalist, if you haven't become convinced of the truth of physicalism, so be it. We'll at least explore what will we say about death if we've decided that people are basically just bodies. Now you'll recall that at the start of the semester I said, in thinking about the question, could I survive my death, there were two basic things we had to get clear on. First, we had to get clear on what am I? What are my parts? And that's why we've spent the last several weeks worrying about the question, am I just a body? Am I a body and an immaterial soul as well? Or perhaps, strictly speaking, just the soul? Having looked at that question, we're now going to turn to the second basic question. What would it be to survive? What would it be for a thing like that to continue to exist? Now, of course, we're going to ask most particularly, what would it be for a thing like that to survive the death of the body? Could it even make sense for a person to survive the death of his body? You might think the answer to that is no if we are physicalists, but in fact, it's not so clear the answer to that is no. But in order to address that particular question, what is it for me to survive the death of my body? Is that even a possibility or not? We first have to get clear about the more general question, what is it for me to survive, period? Take the more familiar humdrum case. Here I am lecturing to you today, Thursday. Somebody's going to be here, no doubt, lecturing to you next week, next Tuesday. The question of survival can be asked about that very simple case. Is the person who's going to be lecturing to you on Tuesday the very same person as the person who is standing in front of you lecturing to you now? Will that person survive the weekend? I certainly expect to survive the weekend, but what is it to survive the weekend? What is it? Well, we might say, look, we've already got the beginnings of an answer. For me to survive till Tuesday, presumably, is for there to be somebody, some person, alive, lecturing to you on Tuesday. And here's the crucial point, for that person lecturing to you on Tuesday to be the very same person as the person lecturing to you today, on Thursday. If I were to be killed in a plane accident this weekend, and there was a guest lecturer for you on Tuesday, there'd be somebody alive lecturing to you, but of course that wouldn't be me. So the question we want to get clear on is, what is it for somebody on Tuesday to be the same person as the person here talking to you on Thursday? And we can ask the question more grandly about larger expanses of time. Suppose there's somebody alive 40-odd years from now, in the year 2050. Could that be me? To ask, have I survived until 2050, is to ask, is that person who's alive in 2050 the very same person as the person who's standing here now lecturing to you? What is it for somebody in the future to be the very same person as this person who's here now today? Now, in thinking about this question, it's important not to misunderstand what we're asking. Some of you may misunderstand what I'm asking. I mean, some of you may want to say, look, the person lecturing to you now has at least a fair bit of his hair. He's got a beard. Let's suppose that the person alive in 2050 is bald and bent over, has no beard. How could they be the same person? One's got hair, one doesn't. One's got a beard, one doesn't. One stands straight, one's crooked. Can't be the same person. That's the mistake that it's important for us to get clear about. So I'm going to spend some time talking about examples that I think we would not find puzzling and work our way back up to the case of personal identity. So first I'm going to say some things about identity across time, or indeed initially identity across space, with some familiar humdrum material objects. So let's start. Suppose you and I are walking along and we see a train. So let me draw the train first. Not very good artist, but all right, there's our train. We start walking. I point to the caboose. Let's make this look more like a caboose, slightly more like a caboose, just so it doesn't look too much like the locomotive. I point to the caboose. And I say, look at that train. And we're walking along. We come to the end of the train, and I point to the locomotive, and I say, wow, look how long that train is. That's the very same train I pointed to 5 minutes ago. We've been walking along it all this time. Now, imagine that you wouldn't say anything as stupid as this, but imagine that you said this. You say, yeah, this isn't the same train as the train we pointed to 5 minutes ago. After all, right now, what you're pointing to is a locomotive. Whereas 5 minutes ago, what you pointed to was a caboose. A caboose isn't the same thing as a locomotive. How could you possibly say it's the same thing? Who could possibly make a mistake like that? You know, the locomotive's got smoke coming out of it, the caboose doesn't, and so forth and so on. There's a lot of differences between the two. How could you make such a silly mistake? Well, of course, what I would then want to say to you is, no, actually, you're the one who's making the mistake. I agree, of course, that a locomotive is not the same thing as a caboose. But I wasn't claiming that it was. Rather, initially, when we started our walk, I pointed to a caboose, but by pointing to the caboose, I picked out a train. I said, look at that train. And what I was referring to wasn't just the caboose, but the whole long, extended through space object, the train, of which the caboose is just a part. And when, at the end of our walk, when I pointed to a locomotive and said, look at that train, by pointing to the locomotive, I was picking out a train, an entire train. This long, extended through space object, the train. And when I said, this train that I'm pointing to now is the very same train as the train I pointed to 5 minutes ago, I'm not saying what is certainly false. I'm not saying the locomotive is the same thing as the caboose. Rather, what I'm saying is the entire extended through space train that I'm pointing out now is the same train as the entire extended through space train that I picked out 5 minutes ago. And that claim, far from being false, is true. Now, as I say, none of us would make that mistake. But it's a tempting mistake if you're not being careful, and that mistake might mislead us if we start thinking about the personal identity case. But let's continue with the train for a bit. Suppose, as we're taking our walk, part of the train isn't visible. There's a large warehouse that's blocking the view. We're walking along the way, we see a caboose, I say, there's a train. Then for a while we're walking, we don't see anything because all you can see is the warehouse. And then after we get past the warehouse, very long, block-long warehouse, I see a locomotive and I say, hey, look, there's a train. And then I ask you, do you think this is the same train as the train we pointed to before? Now again, it's important not to misunderstand that question, right? That question is not asking, is the locomotive that we're pointing to now the same as the caboose that we pointed to earlier? No, of course not. The locomotive's not the same as the caboose. But that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking rather is, remember earlier when I pointed to the caboose? In doing so, and I started talking about a train, I was picking out some entire extended through space train. Right now, in pointing to a locomotive, I'm picking out not just a locomotive, I mean to be talking about an entire train, some entire extended through space train. And I'm asking not about the locomotive and the caboose, but rather I'm asking about the trains that I pick out by means of the locomotive and caboose. Are they the same train? And the answer is, don't know, can't tell. The building's blocking the view. Suppose we had X-ray vision and could see through the building, then the answer would be, well, look, if what we've got is something like this, then of course we do have one single train. The extended through space train I picked out at the end of our walk is the same as the extended through space train that I picked out at the beginning of our walk. But it might not turn out that way. It might turn out, if I had X-ray vision, that what I'd see is this. Then the answer would be, there's not one train here, but two trains. The extended through space train that I'm picking out when I point to the locomotive turns out to be a different train from the extended through space train I picked out when I pointed to the caboose. If I don't have X-ray vision, I don't know which of these metaphysical hypotheses is the correct one. All right. Easy enough with trains. We know how it works with trains. Let's talk about something not a whole lot more complicated. Cars. Used to have a car I bought in 1990. My ability to draw cars is even worse than my ability to draw trains. There's my car in 1990. It was new. It was sparkly. Then I drove it for some years and I got some dents and so forth and so on. There's a smile. By 1996 or 2000, wasn't looking so good. Sparkle had gone, had a couple of dents. That was the car in 2000. By 2006, had a lot of dents. 2006 when it finally died. All right. Now, we all understand the claim that the car